Welcome everyone, welcome to this webinar, special webinar to celebrate 20 years of outcome mapping. Can you believe it? It's so good to see you all. We have about 70, 80 people in our webinar right now. It may go up to about 300 according to registrations. I can see some faces who have been involved in outcome mapping for many, many years, and I can see people who have joined fairly recently. Really good to have you all with us. We've got quite a program to get through in the next 90 minutes. But just before, I should have introduced myself. I'm Simon Hearn. I'm the coordinator of the Outcome Mapping Learning Community. And Hula is going to take us through what we've got in store for you for the next 90 minutes.
Yes, thanks, Simon. So hi, everyone. My name is Hula Geers. I'm an independent consultant based in Belgium, and I'm also one of the stewards of the Outcome Mapping Learning Community. So to celebrate 20 years of outcome mapping, all the stewards of the Outcome Mapping Learning Community have put together an exciting program for you. The different stewards will be leading on different parts of this webinar, and they will introduce themselves, as well as the speakers will introduce themselves when we get to their parts. So having said that, of course, it would be impossible to talk about 20 years of outcome mapping without having the founders of outcome mapping with us. So we are delighted to have Terry Smutylo, Sarah, Earl, and Fred Carden with us. So make yourselves comfortable for that first session, because Richard Smith, the co-chair of the Outcome Mapping Learning Community, will have a fireside chat with them. So we're looking forward to that. This will be... So if you have followed the discussions on the OMLC, you will have seen that we launched a paper on 20 years of outcome mapping called Evolving Practices for Transformative Change. Heidi Scheffer and Jeff Matthias will present this paper to you. And this will be followed by a panel discussion by Sonal Zaveri and Julius Nyangaga. Of course, we would also like to hear your input on the paper, and so thereby Kaya Ambrose and Mariam Smith will lead this by putting you into breakout rooms to engage you. So that's what we have on the program for today. Just a few practical announcements. Please do keep yourselves muted when you're not speaking, and if you're speaking, please do make sure that you don't have too much background noise. You can keep your camera on or turn it off as you like. Questions are welcome at any time. You can just put them into the chat box here on Zoom, and they will be addressed during the specific Q&A sections that we have. Okay, I'm looking forward to it. Over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Hula, thanks. And if you want to introduce yourself in chat, please do just say who you are, where you are, and any other information you want to share. Before we get going with the fireside chat, we're going to play you a special celebration video. It's a video we've put together to celebrate 20 years of outcome mapping, and it has a very special soundtrack. Those of you who have been involved in outcome mapping workshops may be familiar with it. If you've heard Terry Smutylo play it, or perhaps more recently Steph Dupre, then you'll know this song. It was written by Terry quite a few years ago, inspired by outcome mapping, and Steph has also added his own take on it as well. And this is the first time that they are performing this together through the magic of technology. I don't even know that they are aware that they even played it together. So please do enjoy, and it's about 5 minutes, so sit back, enjoy, and then we'll go straight into our fireside chat.
Don't look for impact with attribution. Don't look for impact with attribution. Don't look for impact with attribution. Don't look for impact with attribution.
Now there's a nasty little word, get too much use. In development programs it's prone to abuse. It's become an obsession and we're all in the act. Cause survival depends on that elusive impact.
Because it's impact any place, impact any time. Where you may find it around the corner or much further down the line. But if it happens in a way that you did not choose, you get those output, outcome, downstream impact blues. Now when donors look for impact, what they really want to see is a pretty little picture of their fantasy. Now this is something that a good evaluator would never do. Use a word like impact without thinking it through. Well now, donors often say, this is a fact. Get out there and show us your impact. You've got to change people's lives and help us take the credit. Or next time you want funding, you just might not get it. Because it's impact any place, impact any time. Well, you can find it around the corner or much farther down the line.
But if you look for attribution, you're never going to lose. There's output, outcome, downstream impact blues. Who are the actors at play for a common dream? What's the scope of our reach in the river upstream? And the waters they flow, they mingle, they blend. So how can we take credit for what comes out in the end? Find your sense of direction, taking step by step, not by ideal goals, and then close the gap. Look for patterns of change towards the possible best. And maybe you get impact like you've never could have guessed. Because it's impact any place, impact any time. You can find it around the corner or much further down the line.
But if you look for attribution, you're never going to lose. Those output, outcome, downstream impact blues. So donors, wake up from your impossible dream. You drop in your funding a long way upstream, and in the waters they flow, they mingle, they blend. So how can you take credit for what comes out in the end? Because it's impact any place, impact any time. Well, you can find it around the corner or much further down the line.
If you chase those indicators for reports full of good news, you get this output, outcome, downstream impact blues. You get this output, outcome, downstream impact blues. You get his output, outcome, downstream impact blue.
Don't look for impact with attribution. Don't look for Impact with attribution. Don't look for impact with attribution. Don't look for impact with attribution.
Wonderful. Thank you indeed very much, Terry and Steph Dupre, Terry Smutylo and Steph Dupre. I invite you to show your appreciation using the reaction button on Zoom. If you've got it there on the bottom of your screen, that certainly brought a big smile to my face, having heard them both do it, but never before together. So I'm Richard Smith, one of the stewards of the community and currently co-chair with Jeff Matthias. So it's a huge pleasure to be with you. Very exciting to have the community come together for this remarkable occasion. Without further ado, I want to get this fireside chat underway, this cozy chat with the originators, those who shared outcome mapping when they published this publication here. Outcome mapping, building learning and reflection into development programs. So Fred, Sarah, Terry, very warm welcome indeed. And thank you for agreeing to put yourselves up in front of the community and answer a few of my questions. And I invite also any of you in the session today to post questions in the chat, and Kaya will review those as they come in, and we'll make some time to pick on some of those once I've had my turn. So let's get underway with Sarah. Sarah, I think if you look back over the last 20 years, I'm very free in how you answer this one. I mean, how have you seen, what stands out to you in terms of how the use of outcome mapping has evolved, has changed, if at all, over those 20 years?
Hasn't changed a bit, no. We saw one thing, the musical evolution is incredibly important. How nice to see people brought together. That was lovely. But I think the evolutions and adaptations of outcome mapping really began from the second it started. You know, as we were working with people to develop it, we were constantly changing everything we were writing as new experiences and new ideas came in. So just want to say that evolution hasn't stopped for 20 years, which is a lovely thing to see. But what I've really noticed is that I think the evolutions and adaptations of outcome mapping have followed whatever the passions are of the people who have been involved with it. And so I think that's the really nice thing, because I think at the beginning, I really felt like, oh my gosh, if it isn't everything, it's nothing. And so, slowly getting comfortable with the idea that anyone would take it in the direction, push it further, ask deeper questions, pull it out and make it more usable was hugely beneficial for everything that happened with outcome mapping. And so a couple of examples I could think of, I tried to jot a couple down as I was trying to think of. The first one, when I think of the beginning, I think about how outcome, and the beginning was like a decade. When I think about this one evolution, was that outcome mapping was constantly juxtaposed or pitted against whatever was the donor reporting fashion of that time. And I think that, for a long time, we were just always like the alternative to X, Y, or Z. And then there was this moment where it just stopped being that and started being what it was. And I think people got comfortable with the idea of an approach that supported the social innovators, people who wanted to work, with complexities and systems thinking. And so outcome mapping, one evolution I think was that outcome mapping got comfortable with itself. The community got comfortable with it and stopped saying it is in opposition to something else and became what it is and what it was constantly becoming. So I think that was one big trend in evolution I noticed. And then the second thing was really that I think from the very beginning, people said, how do we make this more equity focused? How do we bring an equity lens to outcome mapping? And I think that evolution has continued all the way through and as important today as it was then, and I think it's something that that evolution should and can continue. So those are sort of two areas where I saw evolution and adaptation.
Fascinating. I would love to explore both further, but for the moment, I'm going to ask Fred, similarly, to kind of look back and think, okay, over 20 years, what have you seen stand out in terms of the challenge?
I mean, first, I just want to thank the outcome mapping community, especially the stewards, but just the whole community, because I mean, when we were thinking what next, Sarah was quite insistent that we turn it over to the community and let the community evolve outcome mapping, and they really have. And I think it's stayed very much as a living thing, in large part because of that. So that's part of the evolution, is shifting from the idea of a couple of or 3 or 4 people to a whole community of people who have their own ways of approaching the work that they're doing. So I think that's one dimension of it. And the other, to me, is that evaluation community has changed as well. And there are a lot more people who are interested in the idea that evaluation is not just an observer of change, but it's part of change. And that's really what outcome mapping is about, is being part of what's actually going on. So to me, those are the big ones. There are the more obvious things like the emergence of outcome harvesting as an important dimension. And in my own work, really shifting from following outcome mapping to using the principles of outcome mapping with whatever the work is that I'm doing. And I suspect that's the case for lots of other people.
That's interesting. So you pick up not just on the tools, but the concept, the principles within the whole outcome mapping toolbox, which bring them all together. And that's very good point, perhaps, to bring Terry in and to move to thinking. I mean, noting that the 20th paper, which we're about to introduce after this session, highlights in particular, the role of and the value of outcome mapping in transformative system change. And why do you think, this is a question for you, why do you think that outcome mapping is still as relevant to transformative system change now as it was when it was launched onto the world? I have an idea how you might answer this from the training that you gave me, but maybe the way you do so may have changed. Oh, you're muted. Hey, let's unmute you.
Yeah. Let me shock you then, Richard. Outcome mapping is a logic model. We use models all the time in life because of the simple fact that in any situation, everything you need to know is unknowable. So in our personal lives, during epidemics or pandemics, and when we're working professionally, we're always building models to represent what we know of the reality that we're about to engage in. Back in the dark age, that's BOM, before outcome mapping.
Of course.
The logic models were available to us, the accountability frameworks, as Sarah and Fred have alluded to, they just did not resonate with the kinds of reality that IDRC was dealing with. So when we found in outcome mapping a model that was intuitively a very good fit with the way our partners saw and worked in their realities, and a good fit with the way our program staff saw what they were doing. And here we are today, and outcome mapping still seems relevant today. I think it's sort of relevant in two ways. One is in the old way, the fact that it intuitively made sense to those who were working close to the action. And today, now that we have these more sophisticated models, integrating complexity, dynamic situations, embracing uncertainty, outcome mapping still can engage and be useful in those lines of thinking and seeing reality. So there are three basic truths about change embedded deeply in outcome mapping. I don't think even this paper pulled them out the way I want to pull them out this morning.
Go for it.
You've got the three basic ideas about change. First is that you don't do it alone. Change always involves engagement, interrelationships between different actors. It can be conflictual, it can be collaborative, it can be any way you want, but interrelationships between actors are essential to bringing about change. The second eternal truth about bringing about change is that we don't understand fully the situations that we're engaging in. We make our simplified models because we have to, but they don't represent the whole reality. The way to address that problem or that gap is to stay close to the actors. And so that you have to make the actors, if you're going to bring about change, you have to make the actors central to and empowered at all stages, or as many stages that you can design right fully all the way downstream. And the third thing about bringing about change is that change is constant. And outcomes have a shelf life, often a very short shelf life. So in this way, in the way outcome mapping and some of these new models see change, we're really not trying to reach, achieve an impact or an objective and then fold up our tent and declare victory and go home. We're in the process of constantly reassessing and refining. So we're always on the journey of making improvements. And we've all learned that worldwide over the last year. So the three things that have made outcome mapping resilient and have helped it to stay relevant up to today, I would say, are those three things: the centrality of actors, the shelf life of outcomes, and the importance of interrelationships in fostering change.
Fantastic. We're going to have to revise the paper, everybody. But I mean, seriously, those are great ideas and very, very wise indeed. Much to hang on to there. Sarah, the same question for you. What's made outcome mapping still be relevant for transformative change from your world?
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. So I agree with everything Terry said. And I think I mean, maybe underpinning it is this idea that there's a shared set of values amongst those who are attracted to outcome mapping and want to use it. And we've seen that since the very beginning. I think that's what helps keep the community together and the relationships strong in the community itself. In those, so the paper lays out great principles, but under those, I think there are values like inclusiveness and integrity and honesty, and all of those, I think, are the fundamentals that keeps outcome mapping kind of, as an approach really going strong, because it's just the term that sits on top of the acting out of these values through our work and our interactions with people. And then just secondly, I mean, behavior change and relationships are core to humanity, what we are, what we want to do. So I think those can never really go out of style. So those are two things I think that have kept it relevant.
Super. I'm really keen to see how the audience reacts to what you said. Well, let's come to that in a moment. But I've got one final question. Back to you, Fred, and to kind of look into your crystal ball in a way. Where next? Where do you see the users of outcome mapping concepts, tools taking the new innovations, adaptations, applications, or outcome mapping? Where are they going to take it? What are your thoughts?
It's a good question, and one that's really hard to answer in a way, because the people go off in many different directions. But certainly, as more and more people are thinking about systems change and systems transformations, there's going to be an increasing focus at that level. I mean, outcome mapping emerged as a way to think about projects and programs, not to think about the bigger picture, even though what it does is push people to think about the bigger picture and think about how their piece fits into the larger puzzle. So really, I think more and more focus at the systems level, and pushing people to articulate what they mean by transformation. It's a great term, but we don't know what we're transforming from or to. And outcome mapping has some questions that I think can be really helpful with that. And I think, and one that's come up in the chat a few times already, the ongoing challenges of how do you start where people are, including donors, and get them to make some of those shifts to a much more open and inclusive approach to evaluation. But those would be the 2 points I would make.
Wow, very exciting agenda you're setting forward for the community. Thank you. So, Terry, you get the last word at this point. Your thoughts on the future. Where next?
Two things I would like to see. One, I hesitate because it might mean we have to revise the slogan on the buttons that Sarah.
We see the button.
But I don't think we could make it more explicit and maybe find some tools for the recycling of partners, because really partners cycle in and out. You can start out as a boundary partner, move on to be a strategic partner, and that's one point. The other one that sort of relates to it is that we probably don't do enough about interrelationship analysis, and we don't emphasize that. I know a lot of us use an exercise like that in our workshops, but I would like to see something of some kind of situational analysis that really focuses on the connections and the workings between different actors. So those are the things that I'm going to watch for.
Excellent. Well, I can definitely connect to what you're saying there. The very common question when you're introducing the idea of boundary partners is, but they might not be a boundary partner in the future if we're successful with our work, etc. So,
that's okay. That's
indeed,
good.
Absolutely. Relationship analysis, indeed, that's something that's kind of taken as assumed, but it's not necessarily done in a systematic way always. Maybe more powerful tools. So you have a new badge there, Sarah, recycled partner.
I don't, it's backwards in my screen. I can't know if it's frontwards on yours, but
No, it's looking
recycled
good to me.
partners button. I think that would be appropriate.
If I could propose a button, were you my boundary partner?
And will you be again?
Will you be my boundary partner? Yes. Will you do it again? I'm going to pass to Kaya now. So stay where you are. Our wonderful panel. Thank you for putting yourself forward for this. And Kaya, over to you to see what our audience has been saying.
Thanks, Richard. Brilliant timing. You're right on schedule. And thanks too to Fred, Terry, and Sarah. It's so nice to be back with you. A few questions that I've gathered from the chat, and feel free to keep posting questions in the chat, and for the rest of the webinar, if you feel up to it, Fred, Terry, and Sarah, you could provide responses in the chat as well. But I'll start with the very last one that Senya just posted, and maybe directed at you first, Terry. Has your relationship changed with impact since those early days, especially of writing the song? Your personal relationship with impact, has that shifted or changed in how you understand the word impact?
No, it's having lost that battle. It's one of the big failures in my life. The word is still ubiquitous, and it applies in so few instances. But I guess it's just part of I don't know, linguistic inflation. Trying to stay fresh and with it. But no, sorry to say, my relationship hasn't changed. But I just sit on the front porch and shake my cane at it.
You do. How about you, Fred?
Yeah, I mean, it has changed. I still feel really strongly about the issues that Terry represented in the song. At the same time, so many people talk about impact that getting them to reframe what they mean by that, I think, is really important. An example, I mean, I'm working with WHO right now, and they're worried about the impact of their guidelines. Well, their guidelines don't have any impact. Not even that many people use some of them. But the impact is really around, are they actually creating guidelines that people could use? And a lot of them are quite unusable. So, the impact of the publications is more at that kind of a level. And if you can steer people's thinking to get impact in those kinds of ways, I think that helps. There's always going to be this search for the perfect answer to, we saved 27 lives on Thursday, and we'll not get there.
Yeah, thank you. And Sarah, in your context and how you've moved through different contexts through the years as well, what's your take on your relationship with impact now?
Yeah, I don't think I've changed, because for me, it's always been about an issue of power. And so, the word is a word that is used to denote power for those who tend to hold the resources, the financial resources. So fundamentally, no, but I work in a place now where people are unwilling to have long and detailed debates with me about words. I work with doers now. And so I have had to find a way that when those, I just periodically throw in a little zinger about, you don't own the impact. Somebody else owns the impact, the person who changes. And I get a sort of look like, why are you raising that right now? But fundamentally, no, I haven't really changed my belief about it, but I'm surrounded by the word a lot more than I ever was before.
Yeah. So you're still there with Terry shaking her stick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a cane yet, but.
Maybe just a quick round as well. The group of questions. Elizabeth Gold referred to it, and Nand Lal Bandastola referred to it as well. And Fred, I'll direct this at you first, since you did mention it. How to get more donors on board? I mean, this is a kind of ongoing, everlasting question that we get at workshops and get with different projects that we're working with. How to get more donors on board with outcome mapping, and something that Sarah said too, the values and the underlying principles and concepts that outcome mapping embodies. Why is there resistance still?
There's resistance because people want absolutes, and donors are not the power brokers themselves. They have masters, and their masters want to be able to say, we've done wonderful things. And that's how they see how they can show that. So that's where they go. I don't know, my habit is to work with people who do want to do it rather than people who don't. Like, I always start from the principle that you have to start where people are. And if they're not somewhere I like, I'm not going to work with them.
Yeah. Terry, you look back at your years of working with donors.
Yeah, I think the problem is probably one of perspective or position. We always find that when you work where the action is, outcome mapping resonates very, very well. I mean, that's where all the energy came from to Fred and Sarah and I. So we may need to be able to, at that higher power level, we need to frame it in ways that are relevant to them somehow. The same document, just like, our partners could not make sense out of the old log frame analysis. It just makes no sense. It doesn't talk about the things that they're engaged with. So maybe there's another area for the future, is to sort of have a higher level version. I don't know how we could do that, but make it relevant to the place where they are and the kinds of information they need to the decisions that they're making. We haven't done that already. Oh my God, 20 years.
We've tried. And some good responses and reactions in the chat too. Thanks, Enrique, for example, and others who are inputting into that question. Feel free to keep that conversation going in the chat. But the last round, on a little bit of a more lighthearted note, question from Daniel. If each of you could reflect on a funny or challenging situation in using outcome mapping in your years of use. This brings me back to Niger at an evaluation conference that I was giving, one of the first presentations on outcome mapping, and they put me in the category of GIS and geography. I was with all these GIS presenters. But Sarah, anything? I'm sure you've got a lot. I know we have a lot of stories.
Yeah, I think I have a lot of stories with a lot of you on here, so I'll keep everything. Don't worry. Won't reveal any of the secrets. But I think for me, like when I really think about something hilarious, it's like when people learn about the strategy map, which I still think is a really powerful tool to think through how do you affect change. But the arguments people get in, including Terry, Fred, and I, around what's an E1 strategy? This is an E2 strategy. Like it's the most serious thing in the world. And I think it's so, when I think about it, it's just a way of learning, right? Like we're just trying to figure out what it actually means by talking through real examples, but the vehemence with which people would argue around, I2 versus I3, I think it's pretty funny actually when you think about it.
Yeah, I've had those moments too. Fred, any funny or challenging, funny/challenging?
Well, challenging, I guess, more than funny. I mean, some of the pictures at the beginning were from an outcome mapping workshop in Nagaland in the late 90s. So as part of the design process for outcome mapping. And the late Raj Verma was the head of the team. And one of the challenges was getting there. He picked me up at the bottom of the mountain, and we got in a Jeep, and he kept stopping the Jeep and jumping out and making a phone call, and then he jumped back in. And finally he said, well, there's a lot of rebels around right now, so we're just making sure that the next little stretch of road is okay. So the big challenge was getting there, and that sort of continued because this team of 16 program officers was working in the 16 districts, all of which were fighting with each other and fighting with the central government. And I mean fighting with guns and bullet holes in the hotel windows and things like that. So it was certainly challenging, but it enlightened a lot of things about outcome mapping, and was a major contributor. So it was an important experience.
Great, thank you. Terry.
Yeah. You mentioned that workshop. Was it in Niamey?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're sitting in there, and who are all these? We thought it's the outcome mapping session, and there's all these other guys in there, and like, who are they? And they were all geographers and stuff, because they had mapping, and of course we had mapping. That was. But, visually, I have to go back to the thing I mentioned just before we started here, was Jeff Matthias and his representation of the previous day's main points. We often did that. We started off in an outcome mapping workshop. We started the day with looking at what we learned the previous day. And I'm telling you, you have not seen a performance yet until you've seen Jeff Matthias in his bare feet. With all of the rest of us ringed around the edges of the room, and Jeff interpreting non-verbally, strictly with expressive, demonstrative dance steps, all the points that we made in outcome mapping the previous day. That was brilliant, Jeff. Visually wonderful.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Jeff. Often, as you can see with the song in the beginning as well, art and understanding through art is an important feature of outcome mapping as well. I've had People in workshops do rap songs and poems, beautiful posters. So it's something I think that comes out naturally with outcome mapping. So Richard, let's thank our panel before this fireside chat, before we move on to Heidi and Jeff.
Indeed, I humbly bow and applaud you. Thank you for your sharing and reflecting and inspiring us again today.
Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So
Really fun, thanks.
We're going to move on to Heidi and Jeff now, who are going to present our new paper. So spotlight them.
Great. Hi. Wow, so exciting to see everybody. I'm going to start out with a little bit of a backstory on the paper, and then we'll give a kind of a whirlwind on the paper. So the backstory is that the stewards a few years ago set out to develop a strategic plan, and one of our strategic priorities was to champion outcome mapping principles and practices, and that kind of led us on a journey to figure out, okay, what are the principles and practices that we want to reflect back, because we all knew that within our own practices a lot was changing all the time, and we also knew that our community was really more than a space for just sharing.
You've gone mute.
Heidi, you've muted yourself. There you go.
Oh, did that happen long ago? I hope not. So anyway, we who are we now is what I was saying. So then we actually evolved a purpose statement for the outcome mapping learning community for the first time, and I want to refresh us with that. So we are a global network of practitioners working on difficult social, political, and environmental problems. We are helping each other to design, implement, monitor, and evaluate the changes we want to see in the world. And we use approaches grounded in the principles and practices of outcome mapping that bring people together to collectively define and contribute to sustainable change. And again, this is language from about 4 years ago, but this idea of principles and practices came up. And so we did a survey, a member survey, to kind of explore some of the principles and practices that inform transformative OM, or OM for transformative change. We heard from over 50 folks in our community from 33 countries. This is what's so incredible about our community, who are actively involved in equity and gender transformative practices. And from the practitioners who particularly had a lot of experience planning, monitoring, and evaluating equity and gender transformative programs using outcome mapping, we heard some things that informed our paper. The only place we can contribute to change is people or groups of people. We pay close attention to context and relationships. We grapple with complexity, unpredictability, and multiple perspectives. We look at changes in influence and power that are negative and positive. We keep a focus on iterative learning. And so the stewards wrote a position paper to really have a story to share for the 20th anniversary about this journey, an evolving journey of outcome mapping, and particularly around these practices and principles. And we wanted to reflect the current practices that have kind of moved our OM beyond just, a set of tools and concepts, but more significantly toward, relational, systemic, and transformative change. And we also wanted to build more common ground and collaboration across methods and with transformative change practitioners. So the journey began, the process took some time, as reflection does. Jeff kicked us off with a draft, and then all the 7 stewards just dug in. And then we really turned a corner when Jeff and I articulated some of the core practices, and then we had some external reviewers look, and then I helped frame some of those guiding nuggets, and then the stewards dug in again, and then Simon took us over the finish line as with his his good sense, his design, and his his everything. And so now we're going to quickly walk you through our paper, and we only have a few minutes to do that. And hopefully, if you haven't read it, this will inspire you to read it. And if you have read it, this will just be, a kind of a ripple over the top of it to give you a bit of a sense, a taste. So it starts with 3 key principles, and believe me, these are not, the end of our identification of principles. And Terry, we heard some of the things that you and all the founders had to say about other values and principles. But social policy and system change depend on changes in human behavior. It's about people. People contribute to their own well-being. So sustainable change in particular requires us and people to be self-determining and participants in processes to make their lives better. And sustained improvements to people's lives or environments depend on relationships. So it's about people. And those are our principles. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Heidi. So the 3 principles at the heart of OM are fleshed out by 4 core concepts. Here's a graphic. Smaller than the sphere in which we dream of change, but bigger than the tiny space we control, is our sphere of influence. That's our second core concept. Our first is outcomes as behavior change. When key actors behave differently, that's an outcome for us. Our vision emerges from all their outcomes combined. Thirdly, sure, our activities, these red arrows, are strategically designed to contribute to outcomes in our sphere of influence, but those we work with are also in other spheres and responding to other influences. We contribute, but don't own what emerges. Contribution, not attribution. Fourthly, set actor-centered boundaries, not project-centered boundaries. Our work is here. We might enlarge our boundaries, but always with key system actors, not us, smack in the middle. There's lots going on around them, interacting people and institutions, our activities intersecting, sometimes colliding with other influences, and crucially, new behaviors, that's outcomes, emerging. The space where we work is where our work culminates and other behavior change starts. It's messy, but no apologies. Social change is messy. So the 4 core concepts turn a philosophy, a way of thinking, into a way of doing. 5 practices should guide the implementation. Firstly, include everyone, not just important, powerful actors. Ethnic minorities, excluded women, children, those marginalized for health, politics, poverty. Beneficiaries is kind of archaic. They're all participants. Opening a community mental health program in India, the director welcomed guests wearing a sari and speaking Hindi, showing respect. The chief secretary for health was there. She speaks English, writes academic papers, holds a Johns Hopkins Masters in Policy. Got to include her. But these mentally unwell urban slum dwellers were invited too. They need to understand their own health and treatment options, get a political voice. Their beneficiaries no more than the secretary. They're all participants in the system. So too was an illiterate woman with postnatal depression who told her story before the secretary spoke. OM is about people. Include them.
So the second guiding practice is related to learning. So along with the rise in complexity thinking, we see the importance of learning in the last 10 years really intensifying. And you only have to look as far as adaptive management or learning health systems to see that growth in learning. And outcome mapping has always been about learning, but outcome mapping for transformative change really builds in more learning about the context and supports more internal organizational and personal learning. So practitioners had always adapted OM's organizational practices, and we continue to evolve them. For example, to focus on team-based learning and on inner learning, on personal and individual learning, the important learning and unlearning that we need to do to decolonize our mindsets, our practices, and our relationships. The next guiding practice, this one, it's really, there's so much to say about, pardon me, there's so much to say about this guiding practice. For one thing, growing a complex adaptive systems view of our work will help us to facilitate a deeper interconnection between the natural world, social systems, and physical sciences. So as we learn to work in these interdisciplinary and holistic ways, grounded in a complex adaptive systems view, we won't fall back on sort of technical solutions to the complex challenges that we face. And instead, we'll expect uncertainty and we'll be freer to co-create and embrace adaptive and collaborative ways of working. And valuing continuous experimentation and diversity in our practice of outcome mapping for transformative change.
Thanks, Heidi. Fourth, Keep learning. Remember becoming a parent? None of us knew how or why our kids did stuff. We bootstrapped, we listened, we observed, we tried stuff, talked with our kids, our partner, our friends, read books, tried new things. Then we started all over again. We all learned as we went. Do that with OM too. Sense make however you can. In Himalayan villages, microhydros correlate with girls' literacy, which contribute to women engaging with politics and family finances. We never predicted that electricity drives equality, but smart software found the pattern in outcome-based data. But go inductive too. Try things and see, suck it and see. Try things, observe for behavior. If positive outcomes emerge, keep going. If not, try something else. It's called action reflection. And sense make in teams. Be smart and logical sometimes, childlike and inductive other times. Then start over again.
Great. And then finally, our fifth guiding practice is that outcome mapping is often used in combination with other methods and approaches, and always dictated by the evolving context. So to lead from context, we build our understanding of the system, and to do that, we have to engage with different perspectives and ways of seeing and knowing the challenges. Outcome mapping combines well with many methods and tools for things like equity impact assessment and mapping the actors and mapping the relationships in a system that we're focusing on. So some of the common methods reported that are combined with OM are in the paper. So get out there and read the paper so you'll know more about those. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Heidi. So OM is a way of thinking and a way of doing. 3 principles undergird the philosophy: people, people, and people. OM is quintessentially actor-centered. Flesh out the principles with 4 core concepts about how the real world works and social spaces are structured. And OM starts to tell us with whom and how we should reach our vision. And then to make outcome mapping live and breathe, we suggest 5 guiding practices. Social change ain't as easy as 1, 2, 3, but via principles, concepts, and practices, it comes alive with 3, 4, 5. So that's us.
Thanks, Heidi and Jeff, for that overview of the paper. Simon, did you put the link in to the chat, just in case people want to quickly refer to it?
I did.
And just to highlight that we have 2 recent publications of the OMLC, this Principles and Practices paper, as well as the OMOH paper. So we wanted to get some reflections from practitioners on this paper. We had a number, as Heidi mentioned, we had a number of people input into it from different parts of the world, and 2 of them are with us today. So Glowen, I'm going to hand this over to you, and Julius and Sonal.
Thank you, Heidi. Good afternoon, all. We have with us today 2 very experienced practitioners who are also members of the outcome mapping learning community. And so I'm curious to speak to both Sonal and Julius to ask them a few questions about these guiding practices. So Sonal, I'll start with you. Do these guiding practices hold up for pressing transformative change in your region? Because you work in Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe, and you kind of work in a different context from what Julius does. So I'd just like to know if these guiding practices hold up for pressing transformative change in your region and your context. Sonal?
Thanks, Gowan. Just to introduce myself, I live in Mumbai, India, although I work in different parts of the world, and I am an OM practitioner. I'm also the co-chair of Eval Gender Plus, and I founded the Gender and Equity Network South Asia, GENSA. To answer your question, yes, I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. And I think we have the luxury of looking forward because of the rich experience of 20 years looking back. And when you look back, you think of OM as a relatively gender and equity neutral approach. But as the position paper indicates, that there are elements in it that has great potential of being inclusive and transformative. So the region that I come from in South Asia, and like many regions in the global South, they're extraordinarily complex. Very complicated histories of both colonization, cultural inequities that are truly deeply embedded. So the move towards a more transformative approach is absolutely welcome. And I think the COVID pandemic has spotlighted the very deep structural inequities in our societies. So we must address them robustly now. When I was reviewing the principles and guiding practices, what I thought was of great value was that outcome mapping democratizes evaluation. And we've heard, quite a bit about it from the stewards. We demystify the process of evaluation. We make it understandable, rooted in the context that we, us all see, feel, and know. And most important, it enables the layperson, the community organizer, the evaluation specialist, all to come to the same table, whether you're from the global north or south, and talk about what are your challenges. It makes sense of what is happening. And I really like, the emphasis on adaptability and systems change. And I think the pandemic has really made us realize that we have to be quick on our feet, that the solutions we've thought of need tweaking again and again. And I think that's highlighted very well in this position paper. And I think OM emphasizes, like no other approach, that change is a process. It's not magic. It's not static. It's not set in stone. And there's always the emphasis on learning and reflection. There's one more that I want to say about people. And I know a number of the stewards have mentioned that. It's so important that OM focuses, and when we focus on gender and equity, we talk about people, because people change systems, people participate, own the change. And so the region that I come from, it's poor in terms of financial capital, financial resources, but it's very rich in social capital. So people and their interrelationships, and I think I want to focus on that, the interrelationships, how those can enable or hinder change. I think we understand that at a very deep level. So I think that's a lot to digest in the position paper, but those are my top three. Thanks.
Thank you, Sonal. And Julius, you, like me, work in Africa and live in Africa, and you were once a steward of outcome mapping learning community. You have extensive experience. What are your thoughts? Would these guiding practices hold up in pressing transformative change in your region and your context?
Yes, Glowen, thank you so much. Yes, it's been quite a long journey supporting various projects and institutions in understanding how outcome mapping works and trying to integrate those principles, concepts, and practices into programs. I wouldn't say we have a very successful journey. Outcome mapping 20 years down the line, I was thinking it's like from the time the IDRC, initiated the method, it's like a child who's gone away for 20 years, and you hope that when they come back visiting, they'll come back much more prosperous than you thought they were. Yeah, so 20 years down the line, how has this child worked out? And there are some successes, and unfortunately, quite a number of yet to be developed places. Now, I'm happy with, for example, the way it's taken off, especially in the understanding of how evaluation works, concepts in application by very many development programs that are appreciated outcome mapping and are applying it. Unfortunately, when it comes to Africa, the uptake of outcome mapping by, say, the African governments is yet to take off in any substantive way. These are places where we have a very strong, we have governments that I might call, we have pretend democracies, where we think we have systems change and yet they are not as inclusive or as considerate as they should be. And yet this transformative change, which is about people, which is about communities, is what outcome mapping actually sets out to be. So the uptake by this method, or with the concepts in whatever programmatic process there should be, whether it's led by a government, is yet a long way to go. We are hoping that as we work with development partners that appreciate how outcome mapping works, the African governments get to see that change is all about communities and people and societies in which they live and involve them in this, because we have got quite some ways to go. This is essentially important in Africa because of the role of culture and economic power in how people do things, in what people get to control. And when you juxtapose that in where you have a lot of lack of transparency and corruption, then you have a very big problem. So I remember one time when Kenya developed its second constitution, it was actually a model. It was a model that was quite well lauded across Africa. Yet when you look at what's happening in our country right now, we have a constitution that is just not lived up to. So having a paper, having something existing, just doesn't mean that things change. That's because they thought, people still think change is about an output rather than how people live that output. So yes, we've worked some ways, but I think we still have lots of ways to go, getting to adapt what those concepts are and make them being people-centered. And I'm hoping that this work goes a long way to doing that. Yes.
Thank you, Julius. So now I'll come back to you. If you had an opportunity, what would you change or add?
I think what would I emphasize is what I would think of. I think I would like to think of outcome mapping, reviewing, critiquing its OM concepts, but with a gender, race, and equity lens. So for example, we could ask, when we identify our boundary partners, our change makers, our allies, our strategic partners, are they contributing or not to transformative change? And when I say transformative change, I'm talking about structural inequities. So yes, although we may talk of actor-driven, individual actor-driven, I think it's really important to understand that there are webs of interrelationships between boundary partners, between strategic partners, between both of them, between systems. They exist, they represent our social capital, but are we capturing that richness appropriately? So I think there was some discussion on relational analysis, and I think that's really important. And I would also think about, if we want to address transformation, and that would mean gender, race, equity, in its broadest sense, we also have to think about some qualifying criteria when we formulate our challenges, strategies, progress markers, and the like. And always make sure that, are we leaving anyone behind? Have we addressed them adequately? So what I'm saying is that we talk a lot about inclusion, but perhaps we should also have conversations about who is excluded, who are we privileging, and whose change counts, who is powerless. And having these conversations, I think, would add to the richness of outcome mapping being more transformative. And when I was reading all of those principles and the practices and so on, I was thinking that OM has this amazing opportunity to have a kind of overarching value, something that we say, this is for the public good. And I'm really looking forward for the, as we move forward, to be able to work on that as a practitioner. Thanks.
Thank you. Julius, just looking at our region and your context, what would you change or add?
I've been thinking about this question for a long time, and I do not know, first of all, there is a lot to be changed. I mean, that is the essence of outcome mapping, because it's a learning process. But there is one thing that I was thinking along that might actually go back to one of the basic concepts in outcome mapping, and which means asking Terry and Sarah and Fred and everybody else who's been applying outcome mapping to really think. And that is what we mean by partner, boundary partner, the concept of boundary partner. And I know when I was commenting on the draft paper, when I wrote to Heidi, actually I mentioned this. And that's because, it's easy to say people, it's easy to say human behavior, but we're actually talking about entities or actors that range quite widely. And in the process, we have a challenge, or other programs have a challenge of identifying who exactly we mean by these partners. Because these are not partners who are distinctly that you can actually see and identify. In some cases, yes, you can. You're talking about a farmers group or a cooperative, but in there are human beings. And their behavior, the behavior of these entities, of course, is dependent on the humans that are in there and drive them. But what exactly do we mean? In outcome mapping, when we are laying out programs, when we say identify your boundary partner, it's easy to say yes, that, and give those kind of instructions, but what you get back is such a wide range of entities that you wonder, are we still talking about human behavior or are we talking about actor behavior? I would think that that is the one thing I would like, maybe I would ask all outcome mapping practitioners to think about as we guide programs and institutions to think about the concept of the partner you're working with. And this can be as a learning process the next 10 years, let's say, for example. And I think I liked what Terry said, and Sonal has just referred to interrelationship analysis. It's actually coming up because we are talking about actors that are quite varied. I mean, and they're already recognized in the very basic. We talk about human beings, groups, institutions, analysis, and organizations, sometimes even systems to be changed. These are huge. This is not just human behavior. This is behavior in all sorts of different ways. And it's not that it's not been thought about before. It's just how do we understand behavior when we're talking about this wide range of actors, and what we mean by relationship, and what we mean by progress, what we mean by those outcomes as they progress, and as we learn from their progression or lack of. That's what I would think I would really like to reconsider and review as we go ahead.
Wow, this is interesting. I wish we had more time to discuss, but time is up. So thank you very much, Sonal and Julius, and please stay on and enjoy the rest of the program. I'll hand over to Miriam. Thank you.
Kaya or I? Kaya, you go ahead first.
Great. Thank you so much, Glowin, for facilitating that session, and Sonal and Julius for your perspectives and inputs. And together that session with Heidi and Jeff presenting the paper, and prior to that, Sarah and Fred and Terry, we hope that you've had a different kind of snacks at the buffet at this birthday party, and now we want to turn it over to you. And it would be such a pity if 103 people and you had no time to interact amongst yourselves as one would do at a birthday party. So that's a little bit of the objective of the next session.
Right. So we're going to move into small groups of just 3 people in each group. And if you would like to just get to know each other and spend time talking about anything that you've heard or want to talk about, that's fine. We do have a couple of questions that we'll share in a Menti as well. One of them is about what's jumped out to you in the paper that you would like to apply in your work. And the other one is what might be missing for you in the paper that was not covered. But feel free, make this time your own, make it meaningful for you, and watch out for a Menti. We'll be posting the Menti link in chat, right?
Yeah, I just posted it in the chat here. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
So one, yeah.
And hi, my name is Mariam, by the way. I forgot to say. Yeah.
Marnie and I are both stewards of the outcome mapping learning community. This is just 10 minutes. Feel free to make it your own time, and if you would like to respond to those questions in the Menti, give that a go as well as you're engaged in the chat. All right, Simon, are you gonna break us up then? It's just groups of 3. I'm just going to share my screen as people are coming back. And let's see, if you haven't kind of inputted anything into the Menti, feel free to do so. Again, this is specifically on the paper. Just pop the, Simon, can you just put the link in the chat again, or I don't know if you oh, never mind. I think I can do it. Yeah. Yeah, if you want to just give a quick reflection on the paper, either from what you heard from Jeff and Heidi and Julius and Sonal as well, right now, or at another time too. Still have to read. And if you have any comments or questions or considerations, feel free to write those to the community in general, or to the coordinator of the Outcome Mapping Learning community personally as well, and we can collect those and post them on the listserv at a later time as well. So yeah, I encourage you to share your comments with us. All right, I hope the breakout groups were a little bit of a fun way to get to know a global outcome mapping learning community, and I'm passing it back to you, Simon.
Jeff has something to share. 20 seconds, Jeff.
Thanks, Simon. The clock's ticking. Guys, Kate and Temple in my group totally showed me I got my graphic wrong in the thing. I drew the set actor center boundaries and I put it around the actors, totally convinced that circle should also include us. That's the key. Yes, it's centered on other actors, but it does include us and our relationship to the other actors. That's where we focus. Got that one wrong.
Thanks, Jeff. Hola, over to you.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So thanks a lot to everybody who presented here today. It was really great to listen to you, and of course also to the about 130 people who participate today in celebrating 20 years of outcome mapping. I would just like to share some of the upcoming webinars because we have a lot of more interesting things coming up. So let me just put that up on the screen. So we have including this one, there were 6 webinars planned. So the next one will actually be a webinar that's co-hosted by the outcome mapping and outcome harvesting community on how to combine outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. I also happen to be one of the outcome harvesting community facilitators, so I will definitely be there. There was also a paper that was circulated through the communities on how on outcome mapping and outcome harvesting on the commonalities and differences. So do look out for that, and if you're interested, do read it and go through the webinar. So that will be in May. The webinar after that will be about adopting outcome mapping, the advantages and the challenges, and it will be interesting to see the perspective of a funder and a program manager. The 4th webinar will be on outcome mapping as a practical application of systems thinking. And then webinar 5 will be what was also a bit touched upon today, gender and equity transformative outcome mapping. So something with that also needs to definitely be developed further. And then the last one, so that will bring us to the end of the year, is outcome mapping as a practical tool amidst mess, chaos and inequality in the global South. So a lot of things to look forward to. Simon.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, just falls to me to send us off. Really, really great to see you all today. Seeing some faces that have accompanied us along this journey. Thank you particularly to Sarah, Fred, and Terry for the fireside chat, and to Sonal and Julius for discussing the paper with us. And thank you to all the stewards as well. You do so much for the community, and all on a voluntary basis. I want to emphasize that. If you're not a member of the Outcome Mapping Learning community, please do join. You're very, very welcome. You'll find a lot of friendly people willing to support you. And if you are a member, please don't be shy and share your work. We'd love to hear more. We'd love to hear your views on the paper that we presented today. I think there is some good discussion in the chat, so we would be very grateful to continue that discussion on the community discussion forum. Yeah, we look forward to seeing you in the next set of webinars as well. And as Daniel just put in chat, here's to the next 20 years. So by popular demand, I shall play the song again as we leave. If I can just sort that out. I'll even put the whole video on. Thank you so much for joining us. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Have some virtual champagne.
Bye.
Yes.
Impact with attribution.
Now there's a nasty little word, get too much use. In development programs, it's prone to abuse. It's become an obsession, and we're all in the act. 'Cause survival depends on that elusive impact.
Because it's impact any place, impact any time. Where you may find it around the corner or much further down the line. But if it happens in a way that you did not choose, you get those output, outcome, downstream impact blues. Now when donors look for impact, what they really want to see is a pretty little picture of their fantasy. Now this is something that a good evaluator would never do. Use a word like impact without thinking it through. Well now, donors often say, this is a fact. Get out there and show us your impact. You've got to change people's lives and help us take the credit. Or next time you want funding, you just might not get it. Because it's impact any place, impact any time. Well, you can find it around the corner or much farther down the line.
But if you look for attribution, you're never going to lose. 'Cause output, outcome, downstream impact blues. Who are the actors at play for a common dream? What's the scope of our reach in the river upstream? And the waters they flow, they mingle, they blend. So how can we take credit for what comes out in the end? Find your sense of direction, taking step by step, not by ideal goals, and then close the gap. Look for patterns of change towards the possible best. And maybe you get impact like you've never could have guessed. Because it's impact any place, impact any time. You can find it around the corner or much further down the line.
But if you look for attribution, you're never going to lose. Those output, outcome, downstream impact blues. So donors, wake up from your impossible dream. You drop in your funding a long way upstream, and then the waters they flow, they mingle, they blend. So how can you take credit for what comes out in the end? Because it's impact any place, impact any time. Well, you can find it around the corner or much further down the line.
If you chase those indicators for a post full of good news. You get this output out on the stream in bad news. You get his output out on the stream in bad news. You get his output out, come downstream in black blue.
Don't look for impact with attribution. Don't look for impact with attribution. Don't look for impact with attribution. Don't look for impact with attribution.